Hi, friends. You are listening to the EntreEd Talk podcast, where we feature amazing educators and entrepreneurs showcasing how you can bring entrepreneurship into the classroom. We believe entrepreneurship is for everyone. I am your host, Toy Hirschman, and I am so glad you chose to join me on this journey. Let's go. All right. Welcome back to another fun episode of the EntreEd Talk podcast. Again, I am your host, Toy Hirschman, and I am over the moon excited to have my friend and colleague, Jenny Totten, with me here today. Jenny grew up in West Virginia and currently resides in McDowell County, West Virginia. She's tried to flee her Appalachian roots more than once and finally found herself back home with her passion. She's professionally trained as an aerospace and robotics engineer. And Jenny discovered after a series of beautiful adventures, including Haiti, the 1890 extension system, and the West Virginia nonprofit sector, that she prefers working with communities and groups to engineer their own futures instead. Jenny has worked with both community development and local food systems in the region for over a decade, particularly supporting youth-driven local efforts and systems approaches to community change. Her professional interests gravitate towards building rural economic models, supporting youth-based programs, entrepreneurship, applications of technology to rural development, and agroforestry pursuits. That is a lot. She wears many hats within the region as both a staff member for EntreEd, holla, and a strategy and impact manager for Future Generations University, a small community and economic development focused institution of higher education based in Pendleton County, West Virginia. She also, because of course there's more, she also owns and operates a small cut flower operation and is the proud owner of an endless fixer-upper house project in her home community of McDowell County. In her spare time, because I'm sure she has lots of that, Jenny also enjoys hiking, flatwater kayaking, trail running, and traveling to find new culinary and music adventures with her canine Oliver. Jenny received both an MS in Unmanned Systems and BS in Aerospace Engineering from Virginia Tech, and is a member of the inaugural class of Appalachian Leadership Institute Fellows, sponsored by the Appalachian Regional Commission. She is a past winner of the West Virginia Beacon Award, given to young people working to build leadership in their local communities. That is a lot. I am so excited and blown away to have you here today, Jenny. It's been a long time coming. And full disclosure, as I mentioned before, Jenny works with me at EntreEd, so this is super exciting. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's going to be great.
This is awesome. Jenny has been an absolute dynamo addition to our team, and we are doing everything to keep her as long as we possibly can. So, Jenny, before we dive in, can you please share a little bit more about your journey and how you got to where you are today, and any other fun things that you would like to share before we get into some more questions?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people look at my journey and they tease me about how nonlinear it is to get to where I am, but it all kind of fits together. So I was the kid who always took stuff apart and always tried to build things and was obsessed with any book about airplanes. So I was your like standard issue, you're gonna go be an engineer kid. If you know, you can pick them out of a lineup. And so I was that kid. And so it was pretty much no surprise when I decided to major in engineering in college. But what I didn't really kind of factor in was how much my upbringing in a small community in West Virginia affected what I really wanted to do with my life. And so Virginia Tech has a motto, Ut Prosum, which means literally that I may serve. And as part of your curriculum there, you have to go into communities and actually do community service. So as part of my service, I worked in a little tiny town in Southwest Virginia named Grundy. And so for those of you that don't know, it's kind of where Kentucky, West Virginia, and Virginia meet. The directions the first time I went said, go to where 460 ends and turn right. And so I worked at a mission school down there, Mountain Mission School. And what we were doing was integrating STEM into their curriculum. So they're a residential pre-K through 12 academy. And so they do a lot of work in that community. And what I didn't really realize after even 4 years there was that I was more excited by the process and by watching these kids go into their community and solve community problems and then build robots and do STEM activities. I was more engaged in that process than I was in the STEM itself. So even when I finished, I remember distinctly finishing undergrad, and my soon-to-be master's advisor looked at me and he said, "You're not going to do this forever. You will be an engineer for a few years, and then you will go on to do bigger and better things in communities." And I probably should have taken that advice sooner, but I went ahead and finished my master's degree and then worked as an engineer. I was a civil servant for a number of years, and then ended up through this weird, like, nonlinear process, ended up in Haiti, and actually worked in Haiti. And I went down initially to work with an orphanage to teach physics and math. And what ended up is when I got there, the kids couldn't learn because they were so hungry. And so that led to saying, well, the real problem here is food. So let's just grow our own food. And so we started a school garden, and I like to say the rest is history. My dad came to visit me after a couple of years and said, you could be doing this back home. So lo and behold, I came back home, did a few years as an AmeriCorps Vista, did some time with the Extension Service, and then worked for 4 or 5 years kind of in the nonprofit food system and nonprofit community development sector. And that gets us to today, where I do a lot of work around empowering those that are working in those sectors to have the knowledge to solve problems, both agriculturally and community development oriented in Central Appalachia.
Wow. That's really incredible. I didn't know that about Haiti and all of that you did. That is amazing. We talk a lot about the root cause of problems, and you really hit the nail on the head, right? Because you can't learn if your stomach growls all day long.
Yeah, hungry.
That's incredible. So when your dad came down and said you could be doing this in your county, what did you think? What was your first thought? Like, how do you just go?
True confession time. My dad and I had an amazing relationship, right? He was probably my best friend, but he was always so critical of me wanting to run away to do things, right? He was always that person. And I mean, he was an electrician. And so born and bred West Virginian, left the state for vacation, left the state for work, but never actually left the state. And so every time I ran out of the state, whether it was for college or for work or for whatever, he was always so critical and always worked so hard to figure out, how you could do that here. And so when he kind of looked at me and said, you really actually could be doing this in West Virginia. I know you love Appalachia, and I know that you intrinsically want to come home. And so this is a really obvious way to come home. And when I got home, it was, but at the same time, I also was applying for Peace Corps programs, right? So I was applying for AmeriCorps, so stateside service programs, both in West Virginia and out of West Virginia, and Peace Corps programs all at the same time. And I distinctly remember there was one dinner where he just looked at me, and I'd gone over to their house for dinner, and there was one dinner, and he just looked at me and he was like, "Jennifer Dawn, what are you doing with your life?" And pretty much lectured me about what I know is what I'm closest to. And so I needed to stick around in Appalachia.
So once you decided to come back home, what was your first step? Because you've had all this experience from Haiti, but you haven't started this thing yet in McDowell, and you come home, and what did you do next? Like, how did you figure out how to do this in your backyard?
Yeah, so it was pretty funny. As I said before, I was applying to Peace Corps programs. I was applying to AmeriCorps programs. And, I was a little bit older than a lot of those applicants. A lot of AmeriCorps and a lot of Peace Corps are coming straight out of undergrad and grad school. And so here I was coming at it after probably 4 or 5 years out of school, kind of saying, what do I want to do next? And so I was applying to programs that were agriculture related. I was applying to programs that were engineering related. I was applying to programs that were STEM related. And I was fortunate enough to end up, I got accepted by several, but one in particular kind of spoke to me. And it was Step by Step, who runs they run after school programs in both like urban Charleston as well as rural Lincoln and Logan counties. And so my interview there was hilarious because he looked at me, and it's kind of the infamous interview where he looked at me and he said, "Teach me about airplanes with whatever's in my office. You have 15 minutes to go." And I did it. And for an introvert, that was pretty scary. Wow. But I did it. And so it sort of like, that kind of put me in the mindset of, okay, maybe we could actually solve some real problems, even from that interview. When I showed up on the first day and kind of asked them what their vision was, and they said, well, I mean, we've never had STEM really in any of our after school settings. So can you like help us get some of these activities together? And I said, sure, what's my budget? And they looked at me and they said, we don't actually have a budget for that. So if you want to do it, you're going to have to figure it out. And so I think Michael Tierney giving me the space to explore and the space and the support to actually design something from scratch and fund it from scratch. That's where I learned how to grant write. I joke that I learned grant writing by fire, but it's sort of the truth where, you know, if you want it bad enough, you will figure out a way to fund it. And so the first couple of years that I was a Vista, a lot of the work that I was doing was trial and error and experimentation, and then figuring out what worked, and then learning how to kind of systematize it and leave it so that somebody else could pick it up and run with it.
That is so cool. So then so that was kind of stepping back into STEM more than the agriculture. So where did the agriculture shift finally happen?
So I did a lot of community garden organization as a Vista. I think so I had 4 placements. I had 4 Vista placements. And I think every one of them, there was a community garden somewhere in the mix. And through that, I met a lot of really cool people that were doing garden work and teaching STEM through garden and engaging their communities and solving food issues. And so my last placement was actually with West Virginia State University and their Scratch program down in Huntington, which is where they were actually building an economy with the young residents of the Fairfield neighborhood of Huntington to actually build a food-related economy. And so these kids were growing food. They were selling it in their communities. They were selling it at the Wild Ramp. They were basically the rock stars of Huntington. And so I was privileged to be able to work with them in my last placement. And so I just sort of slid into that extension role after that.
That's awesome. And I didn't mean to say that agriculture wasn't STEM. That's not what I meant. What I meant was you were more heavily like tradition, you know, the robotics and stuff, and talking about airplanes, and then back to agriculture or back kind of at the same time.
And I think that gardening is a really easy way to engage incredibly young children in STEM activities. And then once they get into like the upper elementary, middle school, that's when you start blowing stuff up. That's when you start with the real airplane stuff. But if you can get them open to playing and being a little messy when they're younger, then it's easier to reach them with STEM, STEM activities the older.
And I've seen some really amazing high school, upper secondary level ag programs that are incorporating all of these amazing things like robotics and different, hydroponic systems and all of these cool things into. So I didn't mean to just, walk that back
you didn't
to say it like that.
You're good.
But that is awesome. It really does make sense though, the way when you said that a lot of people think you have this kind of disjointed journey, but you really don't. And as someone who is also in engineering that is now in this nonprofit sector, I get it, but it all does kind of come together because now you're using that background. I always said, because my parents were also not so excited that I was leaving, that I left engineering. But I always said, no matter what, this degree has been super valuable because it taught me how to think. And it taught me, and you kind of touched on it there, it taught me that I can solve any problem if I really want to. So it kind of opened my eyes to it, and it actually feeds very much into that entrepreneurial mindset where it's like, I know there's a way to figure this out. I just don't know what it is yet. Instead of that, nope, impossible, I'm out. So
right.
That's right. What really I've always carried with me since that time, But that is amazing. So what, well, tell us a little bit more about your own business, about your own entrepreneurial venture in the cut flower business. I know very little about what that even means. What do you do with that? How does that work?
Sure. So I'm a big believer in, if you're going to teach it, you need to also be doing it. And so when I started teaching production agriculture, I kind of said, I really like flowers, and I've always found some joy in my home garden. I am basically an 85-year-old lady and, a 30-something body some days. And so I went down this path of, I was part of a farm training program, mostly to evaluate the curriculum. So I was having to go to the classes and having to participate to do curriculum evaluation. And then here I found myself also with a raised bed. And so I said, okay, let's put something in here. How about flowers? And so I started, and I had always been, I also, along with being the kid who broke things, I was the kid who was always the artsy, crafty kid, right? So I was always making something, whether it was baking, whether it was Christmas ornaments, didn't matter. And so when I landed on growing some cut flowers in my little raised bed and then finding out, oh, you have to make money out of this. Like, part of the curriculum is you have to make money. I quickly became a flower designer. And so I quickly was like making these goofy little like farmer's market mason jar bouquets that had to go to the farmer's market. And this was an adult training program, right? And so I feel like I accidentally ended up in a farm training program and like became very successful at it, because the thing that sold out every week was the mason jar bouquets, right? Not the squash that other people were growing, not the chard, not the greens, these little goofy little bouquets. And so that sort of led to, and there were a couple of ladies that were with me that we were on the flower side of things, if you will. We kind of managed the flowers and the herbs. And it kind of led to a request for a really, really low-key wedding. And we all sort of looked at each other and freaked out because none of us had any formal training in floral arranging, right? I think the closest was one of us who's a graphic designer. And so she sort of knew what looked pretty, and that was about it. And so I realized in going through that process with this one individual who wanted us to provide flowers for her wedding, that I really liked the process of working one-on-one with somebody, right? So I don't ever want to like operate a big floral shop. I really like the process of like, here are the flowers I have. Tell me what you're into. Now let's figure out what works for you. And so that one-on-one accompaniment and problem solving theory even applied to the floral industry I enjoy. And so that kind of that was a trial year. And then here, 4.5, 5 years later, there was one summer where I leased land in Virginia and had like 60 weddings, which was crazy. I don't advise ever doing that and trying to work a job at the same time. But now it's kind of petered down to where I'll handle like between 10 and 15 small weddings or like 5 large weddings a year. And it's my goal is eventually to own some land and actually do it for real and have an event venue, right? So I want to do like the full-on agritourism, come have your wedding on my gorgeous, Appalachian farm thing. But right now it's a lot of flowers in my front yard. It's a lot of flowers on leased land about 40 minutes from here, and just kind of making it work. But it's a lot of fun. It's also my stress relief, right? So for me, it's very soothing to go out and weed the plants. It's very soothing to go out and trim the dead heads off the plants. And so it's kind of just like I stumbled into it and then found out I really liked it. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs end up doing that, right? It's you find out something you're good at and you're like, oh, I can make money on this. And so that accidental success has kind of led to, oh, wait, my real plan after I'm done in the education world is to be a flower farmer.
That's awesome. That's so cool how that just accidentally happened and turned into, wow. That's really, that's one of those stories where I know that, 10 years, 15 years from now, you're going to be this like super, like my kids are going to have a wedding at your farm. And then it's just one of those things. Cause it's pun intended, it's so organic how that kind of happened. That's amazing. So that is a very specific connection with you personally to entrepreneurship, and all of our audience knows we love to talk about entrepreneurship and youth here. So what do you, how do you bring entrepreneurship apart from your work with EntreEd, which we'll talk about here in a bit, but how do you see entrepreneurship fitting in with agriculture and with STEM, and when you do the youth programs, do you bring that in, or you just let that happen naturally?
I mean, I think it's a little of both, right? With us both living in or near Central Appalachia, it's, like, we see the lack of support for entrepreneurs. And I don't mean that. There are lots of agencies providing like coaching. There are lots of nonprofits providing coaching, but the lack of community support for entrepreneurs is a real thing. And then the other piece to this is the entrepreneurial culture just isn't here yet, right? Everybody grew up working for somebody else, and then you had your hobby on the side. Whether you were a coal miner, whether you were a teacher, that's what you were doing. I mean, even in my generation, it's when I tell people that people don't think I have a job, right? We'll be honest there. Like, people don't think I have a job. So
I feel you there, sister. Everyone's like,
right?
Batman.
You do. And, you try to explain what you do, and they sort of look at you funny, and then they're like, oh, you teach, right? And you're like, close enough. That's fine. Whatever. And so this understanding of even what an entrepreneur does just isn't in Central Appalachia. And so what I've started doing is I see entrepreneurship as the next piece, right? So it's like, we made our thing, we did our experiment, we grew our vegetables, great, now what? And so not every kid's going to get really excited about making money from that, but the ones that do are the ones that will become your adult entrepreneurs. And so I work mostly with those kids, the ones that are excited, to sort of build a business around whatever they got excited about. Because the other thing is, if you're not excited about it, you're not going to do it. And so if you hate being in a garden, if you hate squash, if you hate everything about dirt, maybe farming isn't for you. But if you like making stuff, or you like, maybe you like making jewelry, or maybe you like just making little postcard designs, you can build a business around that. And so working with these kids to sort of figure out what they're excited about and what income potentials there are can shift that culture to where the next layer of people entering the workforce in Appalachia are actually entrepreneurs and small business owners. Because right now it is so, I'm not sure that a lot of the kids realize that a lot of the businesses in their communities started out as accidental mason jar flower bouquets, right? So, for example, in McDowell County, she's a fantastic baker, and she's in her mid-20s, and it took 3 to 4 years for her to gain the confidence to actually open a bake shop in downtown Welch, and now she's killing it. But the amount of cheerleading this community had to do in order for her to do that, I can't even begin to describe it. And so, I'm sitting here going, this born and bred McDowell County young woman who is so talented and had to have so much support from her community before she was able to take that risk, we're going to have to do that for our other entrepreneurs too. And so the time and effort that the community has to put into getting a small business owner is so great. Well, what if we start when they're younger and actually start encouraging them when they're 9, 10, 11 instead of 22, 23, 24? We might get there faster. And so that's sort of my philosophy on like youth entrepreneurship and getting kids engaged.
That is, well, and that's why you work with us too.
Right.
That's a perfect segue, because I was getting to we were able to, thank goodness, we've known Jenny for a while. And I know most of the folks that listen to this know our CEO / executive director, Jean Colson. And Jean and I have known you for a little bit. And when we found out we might be able to get you on part-time, that we were losing it. We were like, no way, because there's so many amazing things. And like, that's what you're working with us on, is getting younger students engaged and just getting them to understand what entrepreneurship is. And I think that your ability to organize in a community and energize a community around these young entrepreneurs is really, really important, because that's the biggest thing. I just read something yesterday about fear. That's the biggest thing, especially when you haven't grown up with entrepreneurs as an example in your life, or as role models, or anyone, even as a mentor. And you're staring at this idea. I'm a great, like, for instance, this young woman, I'm a great baker. I can do all these cool things, but what if, that fear and without that support, without those cheerleaders saying, you can do this, it is possible. Because a lot of new entrepreneurs, they don't get that feedback. They're scared to tell people because they're afraid someone's going to say, oh, that's dumb. Just go get a job doing whatever, do that. Like you said, do that on the side. So I think that that's super important, and love to see your idea for a model of how you would, like, something that could be replicated in other small communities, or in other larger communities where there's just that, there's really, by and large, there really isn't that support for someone that doesn't have it naturally from family members or friends. I think that is incredible. So what, are there any specific projects or examples that you can think of that you've done with students that really stand out as, like, some of your favorites, or some of the really, really super engaging? And I'm asking because I'm gonna steal them and use them for our summer program.
The summer program that I'm helping with.
Yeah. So it's not really stealing. It's sort of like leveraging.
I would say it's transferring my brain to others, I guess. So I, when I worked with Extension, one of my sites was Hometown Elementary, which is this little tiny pre-K through 5 school in Putnam County. I think at the time there were 70 students total in the whole school. And so we had done, and they had gotten, they're like the model elementary school for how to do so many things in one space, because they had also had to work with a lot of partners who don't always get along. So they had managed to receive a high tunnel from the West Virginia Department of Agriculture and WV Extension. They were receiving outside high tunnel garden support from West Virginia State Extension. And then within the school, they had a number of volunteers. They had a number of organizations that were working with students. And this is a high needs school. It's in a high poverty area, high special needs numbers, high everything. And so the whole school decided to have a business day. And so it was pretty interesting in that every single class, and so there's only one grade classroom per grade, and so every single class built a business. And this is interesting in that I was not directly involved. It was the teachers taking the lead. And so, for example, 5th grade read a book about lemons, and I forget the book. It is a very popular 5th grade book. It's like totally blanking on me. But they created 17 different kinds of lemonades that you could purchase. And so they had flavored lemonades, they had diet lemonade, they had lemonade mixed with tea, et cetera, so on. 4th grade painted a bunch of rocks and decided to sell painted rocks, right? And 3rd grade had harvested all its carrots from the garden and made like so many different kinds of carrot products, you couldn't count them. And so they had like carrot cookies, they had shredded carrots, they had carrot salad, they had all kinds of carrot things. And so just each grade level, the teachers had worked with their students to sort of develop a product. And then they had this massive, basically market day or market week really, where they invited community members into their school, and they had set up little booths in all the classrooms. And so, I know it's a pretty popular thing for EntreEd teachers, for participants to do, but what was really special about this was it was literally the entire school did it. It was very organic. Each of the teachers tied it back to their curriculum. And so I sort of took notes and I said, this is cool. I also spent way too much money on painted rocks that day, of course, right? Because that's what you do.
A whole shelf full of pet rocks.
Yeah. How do you turn down a 4th grader with a pet rock painted like your dog? I don't know.
You don't.
Which is key. Right, you don't. You just hand them $3 and walk away. And so I sort of took note and kind of went back and said, this is a cool idea. I want to do this somewhere else. And so when I moved down to McDowell County, Welch Elementary is a much larger school than hometown, but it was sort of set up in that same, like, it was a community, and it was designated as a community school. But also the whole school was a community in of itself, and the principal there was amazing, and sort of just was up for anything. And they had started doing some makerspace activities, but they didn't necessarily know what to do with the things that were made out of the makerspace stuff. And so, enter Jenny, and Jenny says, Dr. East, what about selling some of this? And she sort of looked at me, and I remember her and a couple of the other teachers that were sitting there. It had never occurred to them that somebody would want to buy something that their elementary students had produced because it couldn't compete with adult crafts. And so the aha moment for them was when I was like, I dropped $50 at Hometown Elementary on pet rocks, right? Like, I'm not going to lie. I own up to it, and I probably dropped another $10 on lemonade and cookies and other things around the school. And there was an entire community doing that. It wasn't just the parents of the kids. It was the entire community. And so with a lot of coaching, we went through and helped each class kind of do what the teachers at Hometown had done, but help each class figure out a product that they were interested in doing. And it was the first time the teachers sort of saw entrepreneurship in action, because the kids were running the show and they didn't know what to do with themselves. And so when first grade said, we just want to do a yard sale. And I saw the teacher hesitate for a moment. And then she said, you know what? If that's what you guys want to do, let's just do a yard sale. And so each kid, obviously with permission of their guardian, brought in 5 items from their home to say, to set up as a yard sale. And by gosh darn it, 90% of that stuff left the school on the 2 days that they had the market there. The special needs classrooms made slime because it was a texture moment for them. They got to actually do some of their therapy while they were making these very fancy, very lovely slimes, and they got to sell them. So they got to actually see, something I made, I earned an income from. And so I think the moment of coaching each teacher through what their product was and their class through what their product was pretty much hit home with me as how much coaching really has to happen. And also it was you get to experience 40 favorite activities in a day instead of just one. So I think the whole school market days where the kids really have run the show are probably my favorite things.
I love that. We've done several of those, and I just spoke with a principal the other day, and because of pandemic, they haven't done one in a couple of years. And the kids that are now, it's a pre-K through 8, so they've got a lot. So the kids that are in some of the older grades that experienced it 2, 3, they still remember it, and they still ask every day, are we going to do that again? Because just that process, they've learned so much. They learned so much about what you said, I can make something that's valuable. And that's such a satisfying feeling of oh my gosh, and you start to think, if everything goes wrong, I can be an entrepreneur. If I have this option now for forever. And that's such an important thing to know. I never knew that until I accidentally stumbled upon it later, and it's just such a valuable thing. And then for kids to go through the process, we had a 5th grade group that really went through a process of they presented to us, pitched to us to get a loan to buy a bunch of these craft things, and they made some really intricate jewelry, metal jewelry. They had some tools and all kinds of things, and I bought several of these things for my kids and stuff. But it was just, but they did the whole thing, and they figured out the cost, and they figured out what they'd have to sell it for, and they figured out how many they would sell to get their return. They went. And that was I think that was a 5th grade group, but most of all the other groups went through a similar process. Just, when you were down in 1st and 2nd grade, it was a little bit less intense, but it was still understanding how that whole process of making money and the whole process of getting your stuff to market. And it was just really, an incredible thing. And the impact that makes on students is amazing. And the day itself is so energizing because you get to see what all these other classes are doing, and you get to, the kids had some time to buy. In the ones that we've done, the kids get some time to go purchase other things, and some of the schools are able even to give their students a credit. We were able to give some funding for that too, which was really cool. But yeah, that is really neat. And like we mentioned before, just a shout out that EntreEd is doing an Appalachian Entrepreneurship Academy for 2 weeks this summer in July. And it's through the ARC. We can put the link in. If any states have not sent students, I don't know if it was extended from last week, but there might still be some opportunities for openings. And it's going to be 2 weeks of crazy, amazing entrepreneurship with Jenny and Toy and a bunch of other folks that are on our team. So that'll be really fun. But so this has been wonderful. I'm so excited I knew you, but I didn't know all of these things. So how can folks learn more about you and about what you're doing, about futures? We'll put your EntreEd information in the link, but tell us about that, and we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Sure. So obviously you can email me with EntreEd, but also my Future Generations University email is just jenny.totten@future.edu. And we do a lot of really cool stuff with nature-based enterprises and coaching landowners through like agroforestry, economic development, as well as some youth agriculture stuff. So we do a lot of fun things too.
That is awesome. Actually, I'm gonna add one more thing. Tell us a little bit about Futures, because it's a small school, but it's really, really interesting what you're doing there and the kinds of programs you have.
Yeah. So Future Generations University, it's about 30 in. Okay, so Future Generations University is a teeny tiny private school on top of North Mountain in Pendleton County. It is the prettiest view you'll ever see. When you look over the tiny campus, you see Germany Valley and all of the gorgeous farmland and the mountains behind it, near Seneca Rocks. And so what they do is they basically work with communities to help those communities solve problems that they've identified. So community development. We only offer we offer a master's degree, and that's it. It's in applied community development. If you're a student at Future, you can be a student from anywhere. So everything is virtual or distance-based, but you have to be working in a community doing something related to community development or education or something like that. Because as you're going through and learning all of the theory, the labs that you would do, what would normally be your thesis, is actually the work that you're doing in the community. So we help you document the work that you're doing in a way that you can either submit it as a project plan at the end of your master's degree, or for a grant award, or for anything. So a lot of our students are AmeriCorps Vistas. A lot of them are returned Peace Corps volunteers. A lot of our students are folks that are either volunteering or working in the community and not in the nonprofit sector. And so we basically, we have students from Haiti, we have students from Nepal, of course we have students in Appalachian and the rest of the United States as well. And so it's a 2-year program. I actually work for Future as part of the Appalachian team. And so what we do on the Appalachia team is a lot of what you would think of as typical outreach and extension functions too, but we started with the maple syrup industry and growing the maple syrup industry in Central Appalachia because it was a way for farmers to earn income in January, February, March, which are their low seasons. It's when the money that they had earned during the year starts to dry up and they need to get ready for planting their fields in the following year. And so we started with a little bit of coaching and organizing work there, and it sort of has expanded to include more non-timber forest products like ginseng, mushrooms, et cetera, recreational tourism, so the zip lines, the bird watching and all of that, and kind of looking at intersections of what is available in Appalachia land with economic opportunities and tourism opportunities. So that's a lot of what the Appalachia team does. And then a whole layer beneath that of we've got to get a workforce interested in this. So we do some youth development work too to get them excited, because if you didn't grow up on Seneca or on Snowshoe, you don't know that you can work in the outdoor industry and make a decent living. And so we try to expose kids and work with partners who are working to expose kids to those careers as well.
That is awesome. I just think that's it's such a small college, but it's really neat what you guys are doing, especially when you can have students from everywhere working in their communities and making a difference, like you said, in Nepal and Haiti and just different places that
Mhm.
have access to that school. That's so cool. Well, awesome. Well, thank you, Jenny, so much for being here. I know that our audience is going to absolutely adore you, as we do. But I really appreciate your time, and so glad I've had you on. We like to have all of our folks on the podcast, and usually these are really, really well received ones because we already know each other and have a good rapport, so it makes it a whole lot easier an interview. But I really do
Thanks so much.
appreciate it, and I'm so glad and grateful to be working with you, and we'll see what comes next. So that's exciting.
Yeah, new adventures. It'll be fun.
Again, thank you so much, and we will be speaking real soon.
All right, sounds great.